I couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay. So nobody could hear me then, right?
So I just unmuted the necessary people, so we should be ready to go.
All right. Good evening and welcome to Come Sit With Me, Conversations with Dr. Gladys DeVane. I'm Stephana Colbert, the owner of Jewell Publishing, which sponsors this series and has published Gladys's book. This is the second in a series of 5 interviews in which Dr. DeVane will share with you excerpts from her book, Come Sit With Me, Life in Poetry, Prose and Plays. During these sessions, Dr. DeVane will also provide information related to her ongoing projects while engaging other artists and individuals of note in conversations related to their professional journeys, their work, and their inspiration. A few housekeeping notes, of course, as you just noticed, we're recording the session, which we'll make available on our YouTube page. Also, you will be muted. You're supposed to be muted. The cameras will be on, but you'll be muted. Toward the end of the interview, we'll have a question and answer period. And so you can either place your questions and comments in chat, or you'll be able to raise your hand and we'll acknowledge you and you can ask Gladys and Charles any questions that you choose to. We are excited about this evening's program. Dr. DeVane will first share a new poem that will certainly provide us food for thought. Then she has a special guest, Broadway screen and TV actor and director Charles Dumas. In addition to his many acting roles and directorial projects, Gladys will chat with Mr. Dumas about his activism and his current projects, and who knows what else. As I said, the interview will be followed by a short Q&A. Now, grab a cup of tea, a glass of wine, which I almost got, but I decided not to. I'm not sure if that was the right decision. Or whatever you like. Sit back and relax as we begin. So, Dr. DeVane, good evening and welcome. What's new in your life? What's on your mind? What do you wish to share with us this evening? Okay, Gladys, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
How is that?
There you go.
Okay. What's new in my life? What's on my mind? And what would I like to share? Well, what's new in my life? I have an upcoming project with 2 of my colleagues, Danielle Bruce and Elizabeth Mitchell. We formed quite a few years ago this theatrical company, Resilience Production. So on March 17th, 18th, and 19th, we have a performance coming up in which we have written and we are staging it. It involves 3 incredible women, Ida B. Wells, Frances Harper, and Lillian Thomas. We are reimagining history and we are bringing them together on stage. And it will cover events in their lives. So I'm quite excited about that. So that's one of the new things that's going on in my life. Now, what's on my mind? Well, I've been thinking more and more about the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And it appears to me that the haves never quite have enough. It seems that the more they get, the more they connive for more. And the poor person, the poor man, is often struggling just to keep his head above the water. When I ask myself why, now I'm not a very religious person, but what comes to mind is a scripture about the plight of the rich. And it reads, "But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition." And it seems to me that the constant state of the mega wealthy is a state of destruction and perdition. So that's what's been on my mind. And so rather than share a reading from my book, Come Sit With Me, I would like to share with you a poem that I've written on that topic entitled The Soul of a Rich Man. The soul of a rich man. Caught in the grips of want and greed, he clamors for more than he could ever use or need. Gigantic houses, acres of land, luxurious yachts, cars, planes, it's really insane. What he does not consume, he chooses to store, and he tirelessly connives to gain more and more. Material wealth, that's the name of his game. Unrestricted power, absolute control, monetary gain. These achievements, he is told, are valued commodities worth more than gold. So he sacrifices morality and sells his soul to buy acceptance to privilege untold. To reach the pinnacle of fortune and fame, he abuses the weak and obfuscate blame. He blocks his mind to what is fair with actions void of compassion or care. He tramples upon the meek, for he regards them as weak, closes his mind to those in need, saying they're to blame for the lives they lead. They're just not very smart, and they're loath to work hard. They are part of the inferior class. My blood is pure, of a superior caste. Never once has he ever thought the deeds unjust he routinely wrought, denials and beguiles, without conscience or qualm, oblivious of the danger to those he harmed. His behavior, he sees, in his behavior, he sees neither shame nor greed. Power, wealth, control are his primal needs. It's what lifts him up and validates his worth. It affirms his importance and beatifies his birth. He believes the plight of the poor is of their own making, not the results of systemic taking. He has no concern for the downtrodden, for the sick, the homeless, or those forgotten. He says they're where they want to be, where they ought to be. These creatures deserve their lowly plight. They must stop looking to the wealthy to give them flight, to prop them up and make their lives right. He says, this country was born from the work of the strong, the smart, the gifted, and from those who belong to that class of man who paved the way. They sowed the seeds we harvest today. So he says to you, life's just a game, and the winner of the game is he who rules, and the ruler lays claim to the bounty of the game. But I say to him, so yours is wealth, power, and control, for which you have relinquished your very soul. To achieve, you have deceived, you berated and degraded, you defiled and beguiled, you plowed and pushed and stomped to the top. Now here you stand. But what have you got? True friendship? I think not. Respect and devotion? Perhaps a demon's potion. Honor and esteem? It hardly seems. So, rich man, I ask you, sir, what have you gained for your moment of fame? for your years of pillage and inflicted strife, what legacy do you leave that pays homage to your life? You're muted.
Of course. That's a lot, Gladys. That's a lot. That's very powerful. And you went away. Uh-oh. Gladys. Oh, there you are. There you are. So I guess what I want to know is, from that poem, what motivated you from the poem, and what do you hope to convey?
What motivated me is watching the news every day and watching the lawsuits and watching the rich get richer and watching them step on the little man. It just confounds me. I ask the question, how much does one need in order to say that's enough? America leads the world in the number of billionaires in this country. There are 735 billionaires. And at the same time, there are 42 million people living in this country below the poverty line. So my question to that 735 billionaires is, what legacy will you leave that pays homage to your life? I don't think many of them think of that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out what the answer to that question is. I think we would be surprised. I'll say that. I think we'd be surprised. Thank you, Gladys. We look forward to your future shares in that, but now I'm going to turn the evening over to you and Charles Dumas. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. As promised, tonight we have the honor of speaking with a man who wears many hats, a man who's been around the block a couple of times. He is Professor Emeritus at Penn State School of Theater. He's a prize-winning writer, film and stage actor, a director and producer. He has written articles, documentaries, stage plays, and 3 books. And he is a social activist, not to mention the recipient of numerous prestigious awards and honors for his work in the arts, as well as his social activism. So, Mr. Charles Dumas, welcome. Come sit with me and share with us your insight.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm very honored to be able to sit with you and have a conversation about the world that we have witnessed and we are living in. I enjoyed your poem. I think that you raised the right kind of questions in terms of the rich and the poor and the middle class, all of us who are struggling, trying to survive here, and raising some questions for the rich who seem to have the economic and political power. But I'm honored to be here and really happy to involve ourselves in this conversation.
Well, we are so honored to have you with us this afternoon, this evening. You've come a long way from the south side of Chicago.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just thinking about that the other day, from the south side of Chicago. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I do is I write a column for our local paper, local weekly, but I write a weekly column. And one of the things that I was talking about recently in that column was, being from the south side of Chicago and now being a professor emeritus from one of the top universities, and how far a journey that is. And I didn't take it alone. I didn't take it without guidance. I'm standing on the shoulders of many ancestors and brothers and sisters who opened the doors and provided shoulders for us to stand on. But yeah, a long way from the south side of Chicago, long way.
Yes, now I'm going to jump forward and ask a question that, I thought today when I was thinking, I said, I got to ask him this.
Mhm.
You went to the trouble
Mhm.
to get a law degree from Yale. Is that not right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you set it aside.
Yep.
Why?
Well, then you have to go into why I got it in the first place. I was very much involved. One of the things that I've done in my life is, as all of us have, is we've been witness to a lot of things. And one of the things that in the civil rights movement was that I went to Mississippi to register people to vote. I've been to Georgia. I've been to Alabama. I've been throughout the northern cities and stuff. And one of the things that we always needed, we needed movement lawyers. One of my great heroes was Thurgood Marshall, who, talking about shoulders to stand on, those are some mighty shoulders to stand on. And I thought, the possibility of becoming a lawyer and becoming a movement lawyer was paramount in the process. So I got the law degree from Yale and practiced for a while. I was president of Mid-Hudson Legal Services in upstate New York. I worked for Charlie Mangle as a congressional aide. I did a lot of training, as a matter of fact, which was a segue for the New York state officials in terms of affirmative action and equal opportunity law. And what happened, I guess the question really becomes, why did I set it aside? I don't know if I did. I don't know if there was a conscious place where I said, okay, let me go back to doing activism and let me go back to doing what I started as a writer. Let me go back to doing some writing. And I was blessed to be able to hook up with people like Harry Belafonte and those folks who thought I had a modicum of talent in terms of theater and film. And at some point I left New York, where I was functioning in the bar, and came to Pennsylvania about, I guess, 25, 27 years ago, and started teaching. Found that far more satisfying.
You found it far more satisfying. I've got one other question to ask you. I saw in an interview, one of your interviews, and you said when you compared the 60s civil rights movement to today's social justice movements, and you said, we were knocking on doors then, trying to get in. We wanted a seat at the table. Now we have a seat at the table, and we want to change the table.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that it's been a long process, a struggle of our brothers and sisters, some of whom were from Yale and some of whom were from jail. A lot of folks from jail, and that what we have is a different level of the struggle at this point. It's not about getting in. It's not about what I call the Jackie Robinson syndrome, being the first African American in the major leagues. Not the first one to play ball, because as you know, there were hundreds of brothers played ball in the Negro leagues. I used to go to some of those games in Comiskey Park in Chicago between in the Negro leagues. But it's a different world. Now we're talking about we're post Obama. What does post Obama mean? We had a black president for 2 terms. We have an African American woman who is vice president, and who, if all goes well, is going to down the world. So it's not about how do you get in. We're in to a certain extent. Now I understand social justice issues. I understand police malfeasance, etc. But at the same time, what we're involved in now is not just the civil rights movement, but the human rights movement. And we're involved in how do we make those decisions that affect all people, not just African American people, not just minorities, but all people. And you're operating on that kind of like level of Congress and the presidency and the vice presidency, and a brother who just became the leader in the House, the Democratic Party leader in the House. I mean, that means that we're about other things other than just how do we get our constitutional rights as Black people. It's how do we save the planet? You know, as
Mhm.
Brother John Lewis talked about being the conscience of America. Well, we're not only the conscience of America, we're also the people who know the most about that journey of how do you make change. I was very blessed a couple of days ago to talk to a bunch of middle schoolers out here in central Pennsylvania. And when I said, you know, I was blessed to be able to talk to a bunch of folks who are going to be in the next century. And that here I am, you know, from the last century, in this century, having a conversation with, you know, more than a dozen of those folks are going to be around for the next century. And being able to bear witness and pass on what I know and what I've witnessed to those folks so they can use what is functional in that process. So that's what I meant. I meant, you know, it's a different struggle, but the struggle is the same. It's just broadened.
Mhm.
Process of how do we change the world? How do we deal with what you just talked about, my dear sister, in terms of rich people? You know, we of those billionaires, a few of them, quite a few of them, are African American.
Mhm.
It's not like
Mhm.
it's not like, you know, it ain't white folks are rich and black people are poor. We got some brothers. I've worked with a couple of them. I've been
Yes.
you know, people like Tyler Perry and Oprah and those folks, they're billionaires. Michael Jordan, they're billionaires. They're not millionaires, they're billionaires. And so how do we deal with the process of uh, touching their conscience and touching their souls so that they will do the right thing?
Mhm.
Right things. We know that. We know that it's about equality. It's about justice. Like King said, you know, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So that's where we're at. I'm sorry to
Mhm.
be talking on so long, so
Oh,
but at the same time,
no, thank you, thank you. You mentioned earlier that you write this article, and you are writing a book that carries the same title.
yeah, it is.
Um,
I've got. Let me sort of say. There's showing here. This is the first. Not one of. I've got three books. This is called Boomer Under the Bay Above. The column is called Under the Bay Above, and it
mhm.
came from an experience I had in West Africa, where I went to a little fishing village, you know, up the river in Senegal, and what I saw was these elders who were it was the whole you know the economy of the village was based on fishing, and the elders in this village who were little too frail to be going out on the boats would sit around in the town square under the baobab trees and mend nets, and the young people who were not old enough yet to go out on the fishing boats would be assigned to bring them, you know, tea and to bring them bread. And they would have a chance to see the elders talk to each other and to talk to the elders themselves. I thought that was the best educational system I'd ever seen. You know, you got the seniors who had already passed a certain level of usefulness in terms of being on the boats, and the ones who weren't quite ready, so that when those young people went out on those boats, they had already had the experience of these elders. So I took that as a, you know, Under the Baobab is the name of the column. So this book is called Boomer Under the Baobab because most of us are boomers back in the day. And the next book I'm writing now is the Baobab columns once a week that happened during the pandemic. You know, we just went through a period, I don't have to tell anybody, you know, in tune here. We just went through a period where we lost over 1 million Americans, over 7 or 8 million people in the planet. We just went through a period where more people died during the pandemic than died during World War I and World War II.
Wow.
You know, and we all went through that. You know, I remember you probably do too. But you know that notion of people used to talk about so and so died of the flu, the Spanish flu. We had relatives. Well, so and so died of the flu. I used to think, how can you die of the flu back in the 60s when I was growing up? How can you die of the flu? I get a cold, you know, but people don't die of the flu, but people did die of the flu. And now we have an entire generation where over 1 million people, no family has gotten through this, no, especially in the middle class and poor families, gotten through this without being touched by this plague. And so the new book is I'm gathering all of the columns that I wrote during the pandemic, and putting them in a book, and then commenting on why I wrote those particular things and tracing what happened during the pandemic. So that's that book.
Oh, that's going to be quite interesting. I'm sure. You're also, I mean, I understand that you are writing that you have written a poem called Non-Traditional Casting. Would you like to share with us that poem?
Oh, sure. That'd be a good thing. It's from the old book, but why don't I share? You shared a poem, but I can't measure up to what you've done, my dear sister, but I can at least try. Now I'm going to put on another light here. I hope that it will work so that I can see, because this has to do more with becoming an actor than being an activist. But let me sort of share it with my brothers and sisters out there. The real life emperor of our unreal world barks at me in the dark. Don't you know anything about acting Shakespeare? My tears dammed by tightened jaws, I escaped from that stage in the theater to go to the park to sit under a tree too sickly to shade my shame, remembering, don't you know anything? And realizing, no, I don't really know anything. Tearing off the tunic, the tears again try to come, and for solace I dig back into childhood, being Black and poor and living moment to moment off fantasies too flimsy to be called dreams. And then as I grew to Black manhood and watched frightened damsels in their distress see me and run across the street to avoid contact and self-created danger. I watched old people tighten their grips on their near empty purses. I watched rookie cops nervously fondle their pieces as I stared them down, packing nothing but attitude. Their fear was like my air, water, source of my substance. Without that, I might have been truly invisible. The only art I had was the screaming and gleaming steel walls of subway cars, which presented a canvas for my mark, until this man came to the lower depths of my tenement cemetery and showed me Hamlet on a bare stage, making me realize that I wasn't the first son who didn't have the balls to avenge his father's murder. He showed me Macbeth in borrowed costumes so I could see what happens when ambition isn't kept in check. And yes, I groaned with Othello, another African crazy lost in a world not of his choosing or of his making. And then step by step and line by line, word by word, syllable by metered syllable, I crawled onto that stage and learned to scream my rage in iambic pentameter. Learn to walk that walk wearing togas and kilts. Learn to stay real, feeling unreal in a totally not real situation. So now, refreshed with remembering, I return to answer the question, don't you know anything about acting Shakespeare? To say yes with my tentative Elizabethan tongue. To shout yes with my pounding African heart. To proclaim yes and to fight for a chance to toss my kissed roses, their thorns only slightly blunted, to a waiting world.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. Now, I understand that you are writing a musical
Oh, yeah.
about your father's uncle, Willie Dixon.
That's right.
Tell us about Willie Dixon and why you think this musical is important.
Well, first of all, it is our history. It is the process of trying to not revise the history, but tell the history the way it should be. We all know about, those of us of a certain age understand rock and roll, and we understand that rock and roll came out of rhythm and blues, and rhythm and blues came out of the struggles of African-American musicians who created different kinds of blues. Well, my father's uncle, but Uncle Willie, was someone who created the Chicago sound. He was a man who worked at Chess Records, and some of the top Chicago blues people worked at Chess Records. And he wrote over 3,000 songs. And one of the main things about Uncle Willie was that he's a very, very bright man. And one of the things that he noted as in his career was that the folks who were creating the blues and coming out of Mississippi, he was out of Vicksburg, Mississippi, those people who had created it weren't getting paid. As a matter of fact, there used to be a weird kind of thing that you'd see in music books back in the day about folk music or anonymous. Well, those songs didn't come up anonymous. They were written by Black musicians. They were written by the Chitlin Circuit and went around and sang stuff. I used to go to the Tivoli and the Regal and see those folks on the Chitlin Circuit. And so Uncle Willie found a way to use the system, to use the legal system to help get some of those Black musicians paid. He sued some of the people who were stealing blues from folks and creating their own form of rock and roll. Not the least of which is a guy named Elvis Presley. You know, his first Big Mama Thornton was the one who got music that he started singing, and it wasn't heard until Elvis Presley sang it. There was a whole bunch of stories like that, and so Uncle Willie helped people get paid. And so part of the story is about the created, but the main part of the story is that he used his life and he used his experience to help other Black musicians, blues musicians, get paid. So I'm writing music. And I'm working with Alex, his grandson, who's also a blues man. Uncle Willie played the bass, the stand-up bass. And you could, half the music that came out of Chess Records, Uncle Willie's playing the bass on it because he was a house musician at the time.
I checked him out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I went on and checked him out, and I thought, oh, I didn't know of this person, but I really like his music.
Yeah.
You also worked on a project called the Osaza Project. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Osazi.
Osazi. Okay.
And what happened is, like many other places in America, we had a police shooting of a young Black man. Osazi Osagi was the child of friends of ours, the Osagis, and he was in his apartment, and he suffered from certain mental issues, and his father, trying to find him, was worried about him and went out and got a warrant for him to be potentially taken into custody in order to be examined to find out if something could be done. It wasn't a criminal warrant, but what happened was that 3 policemen showed up to serve this 502 warrant, this non-criminal warrant, and they knocked on the door, and less than a minute later, Osazi was dead, having been shot. And sorry, he was a very bright young man, but like I said, he had some mental issues, and the community went into an uproar over it. There's a lawsuit. There were a whole bunch of demonstrations. Thousands of people wound up walking around State College and protesting. There was even a committee called the 320 Committee that was formed to continually protest what had happened to this to Osazi. And I said, well, one of the things I do, besides being a lawyer, is I'm a playwright, I'm an actor. So I wrote a play based on the story. And it's been presented several times, but it's been state and in the community to spread the story of what happens in these circumstances. Well, that was a few years ago. Since then, as we know, George Floyd, there's all kinds of police interaction with Black, particularly Black young men and Black young women. I don't have to say this to you or most of the folks out there past a certain age. All this stuff has been going on since I was a kid. I mean, there's nothing under the sun. Cops have been beating and brutalizing Black children, Black teenagers, outside of Chicago to Harlem to Brooklyn to all over the country. What's different, of course, is that there is technology now, so that it's being recorded, so that people can see it. I remember when I was out in California, and the Rodney King thing happened a few years.
Yes.
And that was, that was back in the 90s. And the thing that was different about Rodney King wasn't the fact that he was beaten mercilessly by the police in LA, but that somebody had the sense to turn on the camera. Had the sense to turn. Now, Rodney was not killed, he was severely injured. And the thing that ultimately happened wasn't the fact that he was beaten, which happened all the time, but the fact that when the people who did the beating were tried by a jury of their peers, not the jury of peers by Rodney, but the jury of their peers, a white jury that wasn't in LA but was outside in the predominantly white community, and they were exonerated. Now that led me back to growing up on the south side of Chicago. It led me back to thinking about a guy named Emmett Till, who I knew because he was from the south side, a couple of years older than me, but I knew. And that he was lynched, he was killed. It wasn't by the police, but he was killed by white people who thought they had the right to kill a young black man. And when they were put on trial, due to the efforts of his mother, due to the efforts of the NAACP, when they were put on trial, they were exonerated. Took the jury, the white men, less than an hour. As a matter of fact, one of the jurors said at the time, it wouldn't have taken us so long, but we stopped to have a Coke. And why do we know this story? We know this story because after they were exonerated, because of the rule of double jeopardy, after they were exonerated, they wrote a story that told about what they had done because they couldn't be tried anymore because of double jeopardy. So these things have gone on my entire life. One of the things that's happening now is that they're changing. These young people are saying, no more. This is done. No more. We have proof. And not only we have proof, we have the spirit and we have the tenacity to fight against this. So that's how I was saying my part was, I'm a writer, let me write a play and let me produce that play. And I worked with his mother and father, they're good friends of ours. Went to Nigeria, went to Africa with them. And let's use that to get the word out.
Thank you. I've got, I don't know that you know this, but the two of us belong to a very special club. I call it the 50s plus club. Meaning that we have been married to the same person for 50 years plus. In fact, this year I will celebrate my 60th anniversary. And I say there are very few people that belong to that club. And to belong to that club, one must live long and be strong. And I would like for you to finish this sentence for me. To belong to this club, one must live long, be strong, and
be patient.
Be patient.
And know that person who is your partner for 50 years is the most important person in your life. The most important. I know, well, wait a minute, now how about the children? Well, the children are grown, they're gone. How about your parents? Well, they were around those early years. But that person who's been there for 50 years, who's got your back, who's got your heart, the most important person, and that deals with you as if you are the most important person, that respects you, that loves you, and has a good sense of humor.
In fact, my mom used to say to me, well, the reason your marriage has lasted so long, my husband traveled a lot. Yeah, and he says he's gone all of the time. That's why. And part of that might be true. That part of that might be true. I want to I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions and or make comments. And then also I would like for you to talk a little bit about, if we have time, a project that you've worked with Stephanie Colbert on. But Stephanie, would you, are there any questions or comments in the chat room?
Yes, there are. And so what I want to happen is anybody who, I'm going to read the first question in chat, and I'm going to ask that person to dialogue with Mr. Dumas if she'd like. In any event, raise your hand if you have a question or put it in chat and we'll go that way. I personally have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to defer to the audience right now. So the first question we have is from Carolyn Holland, and she says, you registered people to vote in Mississippi. I assume that was during the tumultuous 60s. Where did the courage come from to stand up against the implacable hatred that murdered folks like Medgar Evers seemingly without consequence?
It's an excellent question, Carolyn. Let me illustrate it with this. I went down to a thing called Mississippi Freedom Summer in 1964. I was inspired for that because when we went from Chicago, we went to the March on Washington in 60. Everybody knows that because of the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech, but there was a whole bunch of other stuff happening. The main thing that happened was that we went from being a movement that was kind of provincial and relatively small from our perspective on the south side of Chicago, to being a movement where 250,000 people showed up. 250,000. Most of them were African American, probably 70–80% were African American, but there was a whole bunch of white folks who showed up because it was a march for freedom and jobs, and it was sponsored by the union. 250,000 people. I remember coming out of the station down there with my church group that was coming and seeing all of those people and realizing that I had that I was part of a movement that wasn't just us in our little provincial area of the south side of Chicago, but was worldwide and certainly nationwide. Now, so from that was inspired and went down to Mississippi. One of the things that happened, I was just literally writing about this last week, was that of the 1,000 volunteers, not volunteers, but 1,000 workers who went to Mississippi during Freedom Summer, 700 of them were white. Why? Because the leadership said, well, you know, they're not going to kill white people. They're not going to lynch white people.
There's still white people around.
It's still, they're not going to do that. Well, guess what happened? The first day showed up, the first day, they took 3 of our brothers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Mickey Swerner, and they took them out and they killed them, lynched them. And 2 of them were white guys, brothers from New York. You know, so the lie of that these white racists will kill anybody if you are threatening their way of life, their way of white supremacy life. And so we learned something from that. And that night, literally that night and the next week, all of us did a lot of praying and a lot of talking because we were scared to death. I would love to sit here and say, well, yeah, I would shoot, man, power to the people, bullshit. What happened, you know, we don't want to die.
John Brown.
John Brown, we don't want to die.
You said John Brown? I said John Brown first.
And so that it became, so what the question becomes, then why did you stay? Why did you stay in the struggle? Why did you continue knowing your life was at stake? Because we had each other, and we were standing on the shoulders of people like Thurgood Marshall, people like John Brown, people like Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, Shirley Chisholm were one of them. We were standing on the shoulders of these folks. We had an obligation that said that we had to keep on struggling because people had struggled to put us where we were.
I'm so thankful that you did struggle, because that's why I can do what I do now. My family members can do what they do now. I appreciate you, because I would have been so afraid. I'm writing about that period right now. And in my research, countless people, they just shut them down with impunity. They didn't care because they knew nothing was going to happen. Hundreds of thousands of people are buried in Mississippi. We don't even know about.
When they went out,
and people like you stood up.
yeah, when they went out looking for the three brothers, because we all knew they were there because we had rules set in that they had to call in, they hadn't called in. When they went out looking for them, they found dozens of other folks. So it wasn't, but I'm gonna give you, it wasn't individual courage of any of us. It was the fact that we had each other. It was the fact that people had already made sacrifices. You know, if you think about Malcolm and King in their last days, they knew that they were in danger of being assassinated. Those of us who go back to them, they knew it. The mountaintop speech that King gave the night before he was assassinated. I may not agree with you, but I know that we as a people are going to get there. He knew what was happening. Malcolm could have gone anywhere in Africa and become part of the government. They were invited him, but he knew that his life was in danger. They already blew a bomb in the house. He knew, but he stayed the course. He stayed the course because it was important. That's why I get so angry, brothers and sisters, when I hear these young people talk about, the lack of importance of the vote.
Oh, me too.
Died for the vote. People died to give us that vote and to use that vote to become fully endowed as American citizens.
Thank you.
You're muted.
I am?
Sorry.
No.
We have a question from Elizabeth Mitchell. She says, I visited the site where Emmett Till was murdered and spoke with a few people there and was told that white people left the area in droves when Emmett's body was found. What I have never heard was the reaction of people, black or white, who were in Chicago at the time. Can you tell us about that? You're muted now.
You're muted.
You're muted, Charles.
Yeah, there we go. One of the things that happened was that, as some of you know, Jet Magazine came out with pictures of Emmett Till because of the courage of his mother, Mamie, wanting to make sure that they could see. Go see that movie. I mean, just go see. If you just go see that movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. But she wanted the people to see what they had done to her son, and that sparked a movement. As a matter of fact, it sparked a movement so much that when Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat in Montgomery, she was thinking about it. But she says that I just taught some classes down in Louisville, and Muhammad Ali, when he was rampaging down in Louisville, was thinking about Emmett Till. But anyway, so we were in Chicago, and my mom, said, you got to put on your Sunday suit. It wasn't Sunday, and I said, where are we going? She said, we're going to see the body of that boy, Emmett Till. And I said, why are we doing that? I saw the book. I didn't want to go see that. And she said, because he was a friend of yours. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know him. And then she said, the boy you were playing with down at the pool, there was a Washington Park pool on the south side. His name was Emmett. And it hit me. I mean, I wasn't running around with him. He was 2 years older than me, but I wasn't running around with him. But at the same time, I knew him. And so we went down to the funeral home church and got in a long line. I mean, a long, long line. Go by and see his body. And that, what I saw in that coffin that day has been with me ever since. It was probably the inspiration, as much as the inspiration of 8 years later going to Washington for the March on Washington. It certainly was part of the inspiration of going to Mississippi. It was devastating. It was particularly devastating for those of us who lived in segregated Chicago that knew him as a human being, a full person, who wasn't a distorted image of a boy who had been savaged by white supremacy. I don't think there's a man. I don't think there's a man over 60 who doesn't have that as a nightmare.
Okay. Question from Audrey McCluskey. She says, just tuning in, I would strongly encourage everyone who has not seen the film Till to see it. Now streaming, great performances, especially Danielle Deadweiler. Till's mother deserved Academy Award nomination.
Some spell.
Other questions? I as I said, raise your hand. Other questions for Charles or Gladys?
I just want to echo that about the film. Please go see the film. One of the primary mover, the showrunner, we call him in this film was Whoopi Goldberg, my dear friend, who got the movie made after over 10 years. He worked on getting that film made. And that young woman should have definitely gotten an Academy Award nomination. The movie should have gotten an Academy Award nomination.
So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple of questions that I have. And the first one I'll ask you, Charles. You said two things in when Gladys and you were talking. One was that we have to figure out how to touch the Black billionaires and millionaires to convince them to do the right thing, so to speak. How do we do that?
Well, first of all, if I had the answer, I'd be doing it. I've had a talk with Tyler Perry, not about giving up his money, but I've had a talk with him about doing films because I've worked on several projects with him. He's a good man, and he is doing some very positive stuff. It's some of those other brothers and sisters who are not doing anything that we have to talk to, because I don't have to talk about Oprah. Oprah is one of my main heroes, for crying out loud. I think we have to understand the complexities of the world that we live in. That we talk about people who have a lot of money. $1 billion is a lot of money, folks. That when we talk to them, they have to be made to understand that they didn't get that on their own. We have this myth in America that somehow or other, if you work real hard, you become a billionaire. That's bull. Where you become a billionaire, you rely on the efforts and work and struggles of the people who came before you and the people who are with you. We learned that in the movement. We grew up with that. That's our community. We understand that in the community. We understand that particularly in the Black community. So that somehow or other, people who are close to people who have the money has to just make the message, say the message. Let people know that it is not, some kind of selfish process of the pursuit of wealth that's made them wealthy. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that in capitalism. It works because you find people who will help you and who will, and you take advantage, and you're lucky and you take advantage. But the primary thing for Black folks is that you definitely did not get there on your own. There are too many people who came before you, who opened the door, who set up the table, who did all the stuff to give you the opportunity to be the best that you can be. And so they have to be reminded. They have to be reminded on a regular basis. I'm from Chicago, man. Michael Jordan is one of my heroes. One of my heroes as a basketball player. He is not one of my heroes in terms of using that wealth that he has accumulated through people buying his shoes, that he needs to be reminded on a regular basis. It wasn't just because you could hit a jump shot and that you could dunk. It's because some people open the door for you. Some people open the door. I just have to remind them. That's the only answer I have. I don't have any other answer.
Let me ask another question to both of you all. And Gladys, you opened the door because you talked about the 50-year club. So neither one of you all take offense. As mature actors.
Mature. I like that.
I like that. Elderly, mature, yeah.
As mature actors, I'd like you both to talk about the experience of acting at your age and the kinds of theatrical and other experiences that you have and how that may differ in interacting with people younger and all that stuff. Is
You wanna-
that specific enough, or do I need to narrow it?
It's funny. That's a great question. And let me just start my quick 2 cents. One of the things is I have a great period right in the middle of 20-something years where I was primarily teaching, but at the same time I was also acting in film and stage, etc. One of the things that's happened, which is kind of a blessing, and I didn't even know it was coming, was that I have moved into a different type. Believe it or not, I used to be this kind of like, back in the day, I used to play lawyers and judges and doctors and all of those things. And then I started went into teaching and stuff. But now I have become a grandfather type, and in my age, the only grandfathers are those who will cost you a lot of money, like Morgan Freeman, and stuff. Cost a lot of money if you want to get Morgan. Or people have passed on, So far, I am still here, and I don't cost a lot of money. You haven't got to pay me billions of dollars. And so I have had a new career, and one of them is because of Tyler Perry. I've done 3 projects with him in the last couple of years, and I played old people, elderly. The old people. I played grandfathers, and it's been a blessing. I've had a whole new career.
Gladys?
And as most of you know, that I did not go back to the stage until after I retired. That's at age 65. And I found when I wanted to go back to the stage, there were few parts for someone that old, and especially a Black woman that old. So that's when I started writing one-person shows, usually from the storytelling aspect and becoming the actor that I created in the story. Like he said, those are the parts you play now, and that's okay. And I find it what I'm doing now, very, very comfortable, because I know I don't have to put bread on the table. I do it because I like it, and it's fun. It's much more, I don't have the pressure of I've got to get that next job. So I can do the things that I enjoy doing, write about people that I think are interesting. And it really makes a big difference when you're doing it at my age.
Yeah. And the other part of it, if I may add on, Gladys, is that there's a downside of it, and that is that we're at the age where there's a lot of brothers and sisters that have passed on. And
yeah, that's true.
I was just recently honored by being called a living legend at the National Theater Festival, down in North Carolina. And
Been there.
I know, and a number of people that are no longer with us, that were friends, that were colleagues, that, it's amazing. And it's, it's hard, but it's part, passing on to the ancestors is part of life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's tough. The opportunities are there, but so is the pain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have a question here from Marky Winston, or a comment. I'll read it through and see. She says, my cup is running over, and I can sit here in awe, humility, and wonder at the opportunity to learn from acting and civil rights royalty. This evening has been such a blessing. I thank Mr. Dumas for sharing his warm and wise words. I want to learn more about your journey and the lessons that we must apply to present day challenges. You are so respected, and we honor you and your contributions to our society and community. Thank you for this. It was a thank you. And we had one previously from Ezra Nanis, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Thank you for this beautiful conversation, for the words and wisdom, courage, truth, and action each of you shared. I will carry them with me. I think I saw Carolyn had her hand up.
And can I just say something quick about Ezra Nanes? He's the mayor of our town here. So that's
my apologies too for really being not pronouncing the name correctly as well. So thank you for being here. Carolyn?
Yes, Gladys and Charles, both of you are so vibrant. You're timeless. What is your daily routine? What keeps you with that sparkle in your eye and that youthfulness that I see?
Uh-oh. You muted, Charles. You muted.
Part of it is my partner. If we were talking about 50 years, well, you know, if you got somebody laying next to you that's been there for us, case of almost 53 years, that helps. You know, bring some joy into your life. That's part of it. And part of it is you know, you're doing God's work, man. You're doing stuff that is important. You know, you have a sense of that importance, that you'll be able to talk to the young people, you'll be able to be able to create good stuff. For me, that's what it is. But thank you all. Those are very nice words.
I'm telling you the truth.
All right, I appreciate it, sister. I appreciate it.
And you, Gladys?
And for me, it's doing what I enjoy doing. And like Charles said, I have a wonderful husband who is very supportive, and he steps back and let me have my space, even though sometimes I think he thinks I've lost my mind. But, you know, he tolerates that. You know, that's okay. That's just Gladys. And so when I get up in the morning, I have something that I want to get done. And I think that's what keeps me going. And I finish that project, and then there's another one, and that's what keeps me going. And it really helps because I'm also working with two women that I have a great deal of respect for. And one is still, I call her a pup, because she's much, much younger. My director, Danielle Bruce, and she is an artist in more ways than one. And, you know, just watching her create art and bring what I've written to the stage, it makes me want to do more.
I got this one. We are running a little short on time, but I do have this one question I want to ask, because I think it's I'd be interested to hear your responses. Please, audiobooks are growing in popularity. Have either of you considered reading some of our classic books like 12 Years a Slave or The Miseducation of the Negro, etc.? As audiobooks, and both that's a really, well, I don't have to comment on it. I'll let you guys answer.
Mm-mm.
The answer is yes. I've been trying to hook up with audiobooks because I used to do a lot of voiceovers back in the day, and I still do. I do a lot of local voiceovers, and I think that that's on my list of things to do, is to somehow, is particularly looking at the classics, the African American classic and that canon. Yes, absolutely.
I guess I hadn't really thought of that. I had thought of putting some of my work, you know, in on audiobooks, but I hadn't thought of reading someone else's work.
Well, if you all saw, anybody who's on here, who we put out some in promoting this conversation, Gladys has read some of her works, and we had some clips from it, and she does a beautiful job. So I think in both cases it's a great idea. Charles obviously has that deep voice that, you know, I think would really resonate with a reading, and Gladys's voice, not deep, but very compelling, I think. So I encourage that of both of you all. And again, being respectful of everybody's time, I want to, however, give you all, our audience, a final opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. Okay, from Terry, this is a thank you. Thank you. I really love this conversation. Let me offer to both Gladys and Charles an opportunity for any final comments that you might have. One of the questions that I was going to ask you, Charles, was you talked about middle schoolers you talked to, and I know you've been really instrumental in doing mentoring, which I think is really important. I wanted to just get your take on you know, mentoring and its importance, and you know, what you would say to others who are interested in mentoring, because you've done I think quite a bit in that regard.
Yes, I've done a lot of mentoring, and primarily the motivation is that I was mentored. You know, people like Father Clemens, people like Oscar Brown Jr., people like Lorraine Hansberry and stuff, people who, when I was a young person, a real young person, a teenager, who came along and got me pointed in the right direction, and made me. I got to tell you a story about Oscar Brown Jr., one of my main mentors. I met Oscar because I went and knocked on his door, and he lived in Hyde Park, and I would pass by his house. And one of the things, I went and knocked on his door and admitted to him that I was probably the first Black poet. And he looked at me, Oscar looked at me, and said, "Are you the first Black poet?" I said, "Yeah, but don't tell nobody." Because I had this strange idea that somehow or other, because we weren't taught about Black poets in the school I went to, and I had never heard of any Black poets. And so I figured I was sitting here writing poetry on the slide because I heard that it was illegal for Black people to be able to read and write Black poets. I thought I was, and so he said, "Oh, okay, well, let me hold on a minute." And he went and he came and went and got Langston Hughes's collection of Black poets, and he got the collection from the Paul Laurence Dunbar, and he handed me about 3 books, and he said, "Go take a look at these." And I took them, and 2 things happened. One, I felt disappointed because I wasn't the first Black poet. 2 was I felt that they were talking about my life. They were talking about my life, and that changed my life. So mentoring, absolutely. Start mentoring now, and mentor everybody. We all need mentoring. I still need mentoring. We all need mentoring, and mentor everybody, because that is how we've done it, brothers and sisters. We've done it by helping each other. We've done it in community. We've done it by putting our lives on the line, but also putting our time on the line.
Mm-hmm. Gladys, final thoughts, comments?
First of all, I would like to really thank you, Charles, for being with us and sharing your wisdom. It has been such an honor. Thank you so much. My last comment, my final comment is, this has been wonderful, and thanks to all of you for joining us. And especially thanks to my colleagues, Liz Mitchell, our historian, who goes out and gets the information and brings it, and then I write the stories. And she's wonderful. She loves to go dig in the stacks, and she'll call me, "Did you know?" I said, "No, I didn't know." "Well, I'm sending you." And I really thank her for everything that she's done to make what I'm doing fun and easy. And I hope to see all of you March 17th, 18th, and 19th at the Monroe County History Center for the remarkable women.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephana.
Thank you guys. Thank you both. I would love to do part 2 of this, because there's so much. Oh, we got a thumbs up. There's so much that I think all of us did not ask, and so much substance to this conversation. I'd love to do it again, and maybe we'll talk about that at some point. But I thank you both. It's been delightful, informative, helpful, really embracing of kind of everything. And so I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you to our audience. Of course, without you guys, we couldn't go forward. April, Gladys we will have a third, our next Come Sit With Us conversation will be in April. We will be focused on celebrating the books celebrating African-American women, the African-American Women series. The books are Ordinary, Extraordinary African-American Women. The Elders was the first book. As We Mature was the second book. We're working on the Millennials right now, and there will be a 4th book as we begin, Young Women 12 to 24. So next time, Gladys will talk to one of the elders, June Davis. She will talk to one of the women in the Mature book who has not committed, but I'm working on her, and she will talk to a millennial, Dr. Christina Sterling. So I hope you can go to our website, which I just quickly posted, to find out about that. We are going to have a second edition of the Father's Book. Charles contributed a story to our first Father's Book, which was celebrating Black men, and he's holding it up, Color and Father, Stories of Love and Rediscovery of Black Men. It was to celebrate African-American men. And there were 35 stories written by sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, and those who have been mentored by Black men. That was in 2006. And so I think 17 years later, it's time to have a second book. And so we will post the submission guidelines on our website, and I will have more information as time goes on. And I encourage us to be a part of celebrating all of us. And I think that's the message of what we have here tonight.
Stephana, is there a comment in the chat room from Andrea from the History Center? A bit of information that she wanted to share with the group?
Yes, yes, Gladys, there is.
Okay, would you share that information, please?
Yes, it says tickets are now available at monroehistorycenter.org for remarkable women righting the wrongs. So please, for those of you all in Indiana, please take advantage of that. Thank you all. This has been really special for me, and I appreciate everybody. Stay well, and good night. I see somebody's hand up, and that's what made me hesitate. Bennett Brabson, was that intentional?
Ben Brabson.
Yes, sir. Did you have
Ben
a comment?
Brabson?
Did you have a comment?
He's muted.
Yes, that was highly intentional. That was a magnificent presentation by any measure. I love it. Take care.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night. Stay well.
Thank you.
Be good to each other.
Hey,
Bye-bye, Charles.
Bye-bye. Let's stay in touch.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.